2, 3, 4.
Welcome to Don't Do That, the podcast where we talk about what not to do at work and beyond.
As equity practitioners, we found ourselves often thinking that folks should stop doing things before they start doing things. Hence the title of our podcast, Don't Do That. I'm Anee. I'm an equity coach, organizational equity strategist, and educator with a deep curiosity for how to improve systems and a commitment to lift others as I continue to learn and grow.
I'm Karen, and I've worked in social justice for over a decade. I'm a consultant, coach, and thought partner. My purpose is to make community matter. I do that by helping leaders create better work environments. Anee and I met as consultants and quickly became friends. Collectively, we have over 25 years of experience navigating equity, inclusion, and justice in the workplace. Don't Do That is a platform to tell stories about making mistakes at work and how to fix them. The views on this podcast are our own. We do not speak on behalf of our organizations or the communities we mention. Welcome back, listeners. Today on Don't Do That, we are talking about facilitation. Now, facilitation is probably not a part of most professionals' vocabulary, but I'm sure you've encountered it in meetings, at retreats, or in trainings. Think of the person leading the meeting or retreat that has control of the room, makes everyone feel engaged, and creates great conversation that leads to good outcomes. That's facilitation. And today we're going to talk more about what facilitation is, what it is not, and why it's an important tool in any leader's toolkit. So let's get into it. Hello, Anee.
Hey, Karen.
I think this is a good one for us because we have actually facilitated different things together. So
Yes, and I love facilitation, so I'm excited to talk about this.
Me too. So let's start with the basics, where we like to start so that we can make sure all our listeners are on the same page. So when we talk about facilitation, what do we actually mean? Well, according to the Association for Talent Development, facilitation is the act of engaging participants in creating, discovering, and applying learning insights. The root word of facilitator is facile, which is Latin for make easy. And so a facilitator is someone who makes things easy for others. And that is a definition from Cindy Huget in her book, The Facilitator's Guide to Immersive, Blended, and Hybrid Learning. Now, when I think of facilitation, I think of it as a facilitator being a guide focused on the process that really helps a group get from point A to point B. And when you are facilitating, you are listening actively, you are empathizing with others in the room as they're sharing, you're asking questions, you are managing conflict and group dynamics that are always at play in any meeting. You're encouraging folks to actively participate, and you're keeping the meeting focused on outcomes. Now, what facilitation is not, I think, is also important for us to discuss. So, facilitation is not the same as a presentation or a lecture where you are spending most of your time talking and sharing your knowledge and expertise. That's not facilitation. Facilitation is also not a keynote or being at the front of the room the whole time. A facilitator is actually engaged in the room, they're moving around, and they're seeing how the group is progressing toward the outcomes that were defined at the top of the conversation. And facilitation is also not leading a meeting, because oftentimes in meetings, we can be project managers, checking on progress of things, giving updates. Sometimes it's like subject matter experts sharing their expertise on a particular topic. And sometimes the person leading the meeting should have sent an email. We've all been there.
Yes.
So the reason that we wanted to talk about this and like why facilitation is so important, and there's a few Forbes articles that talk about how facilitation can actually help unlock your leadership potential. And I think that facilitation is really a core skill in helping folks to lead their team better, to encourage greater collaboration, and to help you actually influence others in a way that makes sure that your interaction with that person is valuable and you are getting all of the insights that you can from your team and from individuals that you're working with. Leaders that have a facilitation skill set, they really do provide a way for their team to get to solutions without necessarily telling their team what to do. And I think that's one of the benefits of being able to facilitate and having that in your toolkit as a leader. Getting into a bit of our discussion, Ani, tell me how you think about facilitation.
Yes. So I think of facilitation and a facilitator like a tour guide a little bit, like the person who is guiding the group around whatever the topic and discussion is, showing them the different perspectives in the room, just the same way like a tour guide might show you around a different, like a city, and is sort of like helping you to like paint a picture, but you're doing the looking, you're doing the talking. So that's how I sort of like visualize like good facilitation. It's at the core of it, it's helping the group, whatever the group is, do its best thinking and help to improve sort of the quality of decisions, and while maintaining like good team dynamics.
Yeah, I agree. I like to think of it as a guide too, that it's not necessarily, I think it's helpful to have some expertise in content, but a facilitator actually doesn't have to be an expert in whatever the group is discussing because they are in charge of the process, really.
Exactly.
So, given your experience both as a professional and working with clients around facilitation, can you tell me about an experience where a group maybe should have used a facilitator and did not?
So I think of this in two ways. Like when a group has used a facilitator and maybe should not have, and both like when
Okay.
they didn't and should have. So I think when you're doing anything sort of strategy related, the conversation about the like what's about to happen, maybe that is the email. You don't need a facilitator telling a group like here's your new strategy. You need a leader who can sort of like clearly communicate those things out. Once folks have had time to sort of sit with it and you're wanting to like clarify goals or sort of delegate pieces of work out, think about sort of like risks associated, really like get into the meat. I think that's when you would want a facilitator to come in and help guide that conversation, make sure all voices are heard, all the perspectives are shared, and that things don't become sort of like circular or you're getting into like debates or any interpersonal dynamics there. But the facilitator shouldn't be the one sort of like communicating out major like key pieces of information. It shouldn't be like, oh, we're showing up to a meeting and our facilitator who doesn't know us is sharing like, oh, we're having a team reorg.
Yeah, for sure. I think that I like the distinction that you make in terms of what step in the process, right, to use a facilitator so that it doesn't happen too soon and or you're not setting the facilitator up to do their job well.
Right. Because that happens. Sometimes I've seen people use facilitators to sort of like communicate information that they are either uncomfortable sharing or don't feel confident sharing. So they're like, yeah, let's bring in a facilitator to have this like hard conversation. And it's like, no, the onus is on folks who are internal to the organization, internal to the team to have that first, go around with the hard conversation and then bring in a facilitator to sort of discuss like, what does this mean?
Yeah. And I've been in situations where, that, especially if that's new information for the group, then you're in a space where everybody now has to process that information altogether. And that totally changes what the original outcomes of like a meeting or
Yeah.
retreat was intended to be. Like,
Yes, for sure. For sure.
so one of the things I want to talk about is and get into is like group dynamics, because as a facilitator, it is your job to manage group dynamics as a meeting or gathering is happening that you are leading. And we have been a part of some moments where those group dynamics are interesting, to say the least. And so I would love for you to tell me, like, what is your go-to technique when there's a group dynamic and someone, Mary or Susan says something that is not related to what we're talking about, or it gets a little too personal?
Sure.
How do you stop the meeting from going off the rails?
Yeah. So one go-to is like the pre-work. So just getting as much information as possible prior to the facilitation about like what are some of the interpersonal dynamics, unique personalities, sort of, some things that you can maybe expect and prepare for. You can even, as a facilitator, think about like room placement as a result. Like if there's someone who is like an interrupter, you can have that person sort of like closer to you as a facilitator to sort of like give them the hand or the pause, or sort of whisper something to them, to let others sort of talk. So you can think about those things ahead of time, if you have that. The other thing I like to think about in the pre work is, as much as I can, I like to have a co facilitator, because it is just helpful for like continuity in the room to have one person who is like guiding discussion and then the other person to sort of help manage whatever the thing is that might go off the rails. And also recognizing like I might trigger something in someone or they might trigger something in me. So just having like another partner in room is really helpful, um, uh, in case something goes off the rails. And then the last thing I will offer is just the like pause and reset. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, as much as I think a lot of people know some best practices for like facilitating group conversation, you come up with some like group norms around how you want to have the conversation. It is hard for many people to sort of practice and exercise some of the like dialogical techniques of like, okay, we're going to take a time out, or I'm going to pull a red flag, or, you know, it's hard for people to do that in practice. So as facilitator, I exercise it a lot, like just paying attention to body language in the room or just energy level in the room, and say like, hey, it feels like a good time to pause. Maybe we need to leave the room and come back. Just reset energies in the room when I see things are going left. What about you?
Yeah, those are all good. I think generally, as a facilitator, you always have to be prepared for the pivot as much like pre work as you can do. Sometimes that people just, they have time that day, right?
Yes. We
And
have
so
time a lot of days.
you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared for the pivot. I also think that it is helpful to have an outside facilitator sometime in those group dynamics, because an outside facilitator doesn't have to engage in the same way that you may have to engage as a direct colleague that like works with someone on a day-to-day basis. And so for me, sometimes it's as simple as acknowledging what may have been said, feelings in the room, and then moving forward, and like not even having to engage more deeply than that, because if you do, it can take you down a road that just wouldn't be productive for the group. And so I think sometimes acknowledging, giving space for a silent moment, and then moving on to continued conversation, asking other folks to weigh in, right, can be helpful. um I was actually having a conversation with a friend recently, and the friend was recapping a rather like contentious conversation between herself and a colleague. And one of the techniques that I gave her was to say, I think we've reached a stopping point. And I think like that can be used
Yeah.
whether as a facilitator or even, if you're in a meeting that is going off, like, I think we've reached a stopping point. Here are next steps. Let's regroup in, 2 days next week. So I feel like that is a technique that works and helps to like de-escalate things if that's needed.
Yeah, for sure. And I love what you said about like naming patterns as well. You don't have to engage with the pattern, but saying like, I'm hearing a lot of like debate happening in the room. Let's try to move forward with, more dialogue and less debate. Like, you don't have to say like, I see Karen and Anee, y'all two keep going back and forth with each other. Like, enough of that. Like, but you could just name whatever that dynamic is. Or like, I hear like a lot of managers only sort of taking up a lot of space in the room. Let's try to move forward with like more voices contributing or something.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that that is also an important role of a facilitator is noticing who are the folks that easily take up space in the room because either they're a leader, their role, they are an extrovert versus the folks that need a little bit more space or coaxing like and using different techniques to engage everyone because I
Mm-hmm.
do think it's important to make sure that you get all voices in the room in some way and having like various techniques to do that. So for me, sometimes I like to do like pair and shares where we can start off in one-to-one conversations. I've had folks like journal before to get folks started in terms of thinking about thoughts and reflections or ideas. And so I do think having multiple ways of engagement is a core part of like strong facilitation.
Absolutely.
So, do you think that facilitation as a skill should be a core competency for leaders nowadays?
Yes. 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. And I say that because I think when you have strong facilitation skills, one, you are a better sort of meeting participant. And I think you are less intimidated by hard conversations because it's easier to sort of depersonalize whatever dynamics are happening in the room. So, what I have seen from leaders are when there is a hard conversation to have, whether like, oh, we're having a reduction in force, or we're making some budget cuts, or, this is a tough financial quarter for us, or whatever, or we thought we were doing DEI and we're not doing DEI, and here's the reasons why, whatever the hard conversation is. I think when you're a good facilitator, it's easy to sort of guide people around the topic without sort of like absorbing people's reactions personally, right? So people will have strong reactions to like bad news or whatever. And when you have that skill, you can say, like, let's explore all of those feelings that people have. And there will always be a range. And even if we're only hearing one perspective, maybe the other range of feelings are being quiet. So let's find ways to sort of like lift those out. And this is like a good way for us to sort of like explore our culture. And, it's way easier, I have found, when people have that skill than not.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that leadership is increasingly complex as our world continues to change. Like,
Yeah.
we have moved over even the course of like the last 6 years, we hybrid work is much more of a norm than it was 6 years ago. Being able to engage folks online and in person and sometimes at the same time is, I think, important. So I think facilitation can help in
Yeah.
that and helping to like navigate that complexity better. So I would definitely like recommend folks take courses or have more learning around facilitation, because I also think that it helps you as a leader to think through the process, right? Like if I need to get my team to a particular solution, it can help you think about what is the process that I will use to get there, instead of just like showing up and expecting folks to automatically engage or understand like what's needed off the bat.
Yeah. Like facilitation is like more about leading and guiding thinking versus like just I'm going to be leading people, right? So I can come into a space, I can say the thing, here's how you need to move and do it, versus like facilitation is like, let's get everyone's thoughts in the space and how can we sort of shift our thinking towards action or whatever the thing is.
Yeah, for sure. So let's move into our favorite segment, do that or don't do that. And we will name some scenarios and then hear from each other. So I will let you start. You can go first, Anee.
My first do that or don't do that is, as a facilitator, are you telling folks that you are creating a safe space?
No, don't do that.
I'm so glad you said that.
And I have to say that I have learned a lot from you in this area. And we've talked about a lot about like safe spaces and if that's possible, what that means. And I do think that it is impossible to guarantee safety for everyone in a group, especially when you don't have time to unpack what that means to everyone. And I think even in the most cohesive of groups, there will probably be competing ideas of what it means to be safe.
For sure, 10 out of 10. I think the best you can do is give people permission to create safety for themselves. So to sort of like give a pause at the beginning, have everyone sort of say like, let's think about what safety means for you and the sort of boundaries you need to create that for yourself, which means if you feel like you need to remove yourself from this conversation or be done with the conversation or whatever that might look like, you can do that. You have the permission to do that. But I, especially in the workplace, cannot prioritize or be responsible for everyone's safety. Though I am working towards that, I can't guarantee that. So for sure, I do not say that because it sets people up, I think, in some ways.
Yeah, I think for me, my commitment is not, as a facilitator, is not so much around like guaranteeing a safe space, but what I can guarantee, and I'm committed to making sure that everyone feels heard. And I think there's a distinction
For sure.
in those two things.
For sure. Like we're driving towards action. We can talk about what the sort of like goals of the conversation are. And, you know, like you said, making sure everyone feels heard and they can all contribute their thinking towards that. But yeah, none of safe spaces. What about you?
So my do that or don't do that, having a meeting to resolve a conflict or solve a problem with no agenda or process.
Don't do that. For sure, don't do that. I personally love an agenda. I love a roadmap. Even if you divert from it, it is great to just anchor the conversation and manage expectations. I also think that some things don't have to be a discussion. So I always think of the like example, like the workplace example of like, you know, one person isn't wearing their uniform and then everyone gets an email like, hey, we should all be, or we're going to call a meeting to tell everyone they should all be wearing their uniform. It's like, if a person's behavior does not align with the expectation, you should have a conversation with that person's behavior to get them aligned with the expectations, and then we can be done. Like we don't need to facilitate a discussion to talk about what are shared expectations of behavior, and just say what it is, and then we can all we can all align. You know, we're all grown-ups. I think we've over facilitated some things. That's my personal philosophy. Maybe that's where I'm at in life as well. Like as a mom of toddlers, I'm like, no more discussions. You just, some things just are. So, and that's it.
In the words of Miss Obama, it is what it is.
It is what it is. See, that makes me feel good. We're aligned.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Having no agenda or process is setting yourself up for failure for sure. Or at least not being productive and potentially wasting people's time.
Yes, for sure. Okay. Do that or don't do that. Call out a bad facilitator publicly. Sort of while they are in the front of the room facilitating, you feel like, oof, you know, there have been many sort of community agreement violations, or there is a person in the room who's taking up too much airtime, or they've let a lot of things go, derailed the conversation. You call them out in the room or not?
I'm gonna go with no. It's not my style. And I don't think in the mindset of a facilitator of thinking about what is best in service to this group, I think it would be unproductive to call out a facilitator publicly while they're doing their job. I do feel like if you do feel strongly when a break happens, or, you know, there's lunch, or, you know, some natural opening, then to pull that facilitator aside and share your thoughts and feelings and experience. I think that if there's a need that's like arising in real time, I think I would say, like, I just want to call our attention back to the agreements that we set at the top, you know, and would love to make sure that we resurface that so that we can agree to keep those top of mind in our engagement, and like make that kind of comment. And I think that any good facilitator, that will be enough of a signal for them to, like, you know, get refocused if they have lost focus.
Yeah, agreed. I have been in spaces when a facilitator was called out. I have been the facilitator that was called out. And I don't think it does what people intend for it to do. I think it, like you said, it then becomes a bit of a distraction. And now we're not talking about like the thing in the room. We're sort of like focused on like the person in the front of the room, which doesn't help anyone sort of get towards the goals or the end. So agreed. I say don't do that.
Yeah. The other thing I will say too is, in your getting back to your comment around pre-work, the facilitator may have had conversations before that meeting, and there could be like a no-go zones, right? That they have to like steer away from, that participants in the room don't know about. And so I would say all that to say, like, just know that sometimes as a facilitator, we have more information than the participants in the room, and those decisions could be strategic.
For sure. Yeah.
So my do that or don't do that is, should you hire a facilitator for retreats or gatherings or places where like you need to determine or talk about strategy?
Yeah, for sure. That's exactly, I think, when you should hire a facilitator specifically around strategy. Or just at minimum, I would say get someone who is external to the team, so that everyone who is a part of the team, including leadership, can actively participate. I think it's hard to both facilitate and participate. And it is helpful to have someone who is a bit of a neutral third party to, come into the space and help guide the conversation. It helps mitigate against some bias that could show up in the facilitation and, all the things. So I say for sure do that.
Awesome. I agree. No notes.
No notes. Great. Should I do another one?
Yeah, go for it. You can wrap us up.
Okay. I already know what you're going to say, but have every meeting be a facilitated discussion. We're talking about our weekly team meetings. We're talking about all staff meetings. We're talking strategy meetings. Anytime we're gathering, we are facilitating.
So I'm going to say do that in the sense of one, you should always be clear about the outcomes you want for a meeting and the process you're going to use, which are core to facilitation. And I think understanding what techniques you are going to use, right? Like, do I need everyone to submit something beforehand so that I can recap that and then we can talk about like where consensus lies or missing pieces? Like, I think it's always helpful to think through things ahead of time so that you're being efficient with your time and other people's time. So I think it's to do that in the sense of like helping to prepare ahead of getting into the room and then being productive and a good colleague while you're in the room.
I like that perspective. Yeah. I was going to say, don't do that. I still stand by that. Don't do that. I think some things should just be information sharing. And some things should just be information sharing. And some things should be proper. Like, we need to discuss this and we want everyone sort of like thinking on this. But sometimes I think when a decision has already been made, and then we are facilitating discussion after the fact, it is a waste of time and energy. So,
Fair enough. I love that our listeners get two perspectives on that one. Well, let's wrap up and move to our final thoughts on facilitation. So I will start and I'll let you close this out, Anee. So for me, I would want our listeners to know that facilitation is a skill that shouldn't be diluted to just thinking about it as leading a meeting or presenting to an audience. I think skilled facilitators really do make sure that participants feel heard, that they feel more connected, that you're learning something new and you know how to apply that new learning. So don't underestimate the skill set of facilitation.
Yes, exactly that. For sure, that it is a must have, and it is a technical skill proper. So it's not just something that you can sort of develop passively by attending a lot of meetings. That there are sort of proper techniques and things that you can build to help develop and cultivate that skill. And again, reiterating, like, this is about not about you as a person, but how you're able to guide a conversation.
Well, this was fun. It's reminding me of how much we've co-facilitated together. So it was a great conversation. And we appreciate folks for listening and just want to remind you that if you haven't subscribed or following the podcast, please do so you know when we drop new episodes. leave us a review. We would love to hear your thoughts, especially as we are well into season 2. And be sure to share this podcast with a peer or colleague that you think would be interested. And if you'd like to reach Anee and I directly, email us at thedon'tdothatpod@gmail.com. And until next time, remember,
Don't do that.
don't do that.